Look at that. We are on stage, everyone. Oh, and I love a good icebreaker. We'll give everyone just about 30 seconds to jump in, but if you haven't engaged with the chat, selfishly, I think Gina's looking for some new shows to watch. So shoot them over to her. We will get kicked off in just a bit. I mean, we could pivot this to just talk about Love is Blind. I don't know how committed everyone is to account planning today. But, if anyone wants to have a very, very, very serious conversation on our feelings on Love is Blind, I'm here for it. This is actually
no spoilers. You got me all hyped on it before, so no spoilers.
It's the first season of it I've watched, so now I'm like, I feel like I need to go back and watch other seasons. So Netflix is obviously doing something right. With that being said, thanks everyone for joining today. We're going to have a really exciting session, really talking about account planning. So we're going to get started right now. I'm Molly Bodensteiner. I am a revenue operations leader. I like to say, in revenue operations since before it was cool, but really spent the last 15 years in core operations, pivoting into what's now revenue operations over the last 6 years. Really excited about our panelists here today. I'll let them introduce themselves and we will jump in. Ben, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Ben Maxwell. I'm a strategic account executive at Affinity. Have been in the software SaaS MarTech space now for about the last 5 or 6 years. But excited for the conversation today. I'm coming to you live from San Francisco on the floor at Trailblazer DX. So apologies for the background and me trying to keep my voice down to some degree, but excited to chat.
Awesome.
Jake, over to you.
Right on. I'm Jake Rennie. I'm co-founder and chief growth officer at Revenue Reimagined. I've been in SaaS now for 10 years. Before that, I did 10 years of medical device, a totally different space, blood and guts every day. It was pretty cool, but really got excited about what was happening in the startup scene in Utah and came over to this and have since been in different startups, started scaling from 0 to the first 10, all the way up to leading large global teams at Adobe. And ultimately realized that I just love building, fixing. And I guess there's a part of me that also geeks out about RevOps too, Molly. And I think it was always cool. I just think people just didn't know. So I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm excited to be on the panel with y'all today.
Amazing. Well, we will get started. One thing I want to shout out to the audience is put your Q&As in. We are here as some great experts in this space. Ask us anything. I love these types of conversations when the audience is engaged. Trust me, as much as I like my own voice, you'll get sick of it too. So the more we can help and provide value to you guys during these sessions, definitely the better. But to kick off, let's take the obvious question, right? What is account planning? Ben, I'm going to let you throw this in here to set the stage on what we're talking about today. Make sure everyone's in the right place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, appreciate the softball question. But no, I think about account planning as, a collaborative document of some kind, right? I think the way that you can envision account planning being done today in the SaaS space or any kind of selling role is really putting together a collaborative document that your team, whether it's CS, sales, account management, can all work in to provide a point of view and have a living, breathing document around cataloging interactions with customers, putting together relevant information on customers, new business prospects, that can always be being updated, right? And really kind of act as your guiding document as you're trying to source a new deal, source a new opportunity, bring that customer on board as an existing customer, and then eventually expand or continue down the road with upsell or cross-sell opportunities within that account. So that's, again, a little bit high level, just my initial thoughts there. I'm sure we'll dive into more. But Jake, over to you. I'd love to hear your general thoughts on the matter at hand today.
Yeah, I think early on in my career when I started getting exposed to it, there was a thought to myself, well, isn't this what CRM's for? Like, why are we doing this? Seems like duplicative. But then as I really started spending more time in the enterprise space and in enterprise deals, the realization was there are so many moving parts to an enterprise account, to enterprise opportunities, and just like the project management of those deals in and of itself, it requires it. Like, I like the way you said it, this is like living, breathing document where everyone that's involved in that opportunity coming together to collaborate on understanding the purpose of the account, the stakeholders in the account, what are the biggest opportunities to expose the areas where we can grow in the account and we can add value in the account. And so there's two parts to it. There's account planning for, net new opportunities, net new clients, but then there's also account planning from the perspective of your existing client base and how we can expand and grow within our existing base. And so like they both have a place and they both run a very similar motion, but ultimately like have unique purposes.
Yeah, one of my favorite people that I've worked for in the past, great CRO leader was like, have a plan, work the plan, right? So every time I hear account planning, like that's the one thing that kicks into my head. And I think you guys said it really well, right? It's actually like bringing together the parties that are involved in not only, the pre-sales process, but the post-sales process to make sure we have a plan around what are we doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And aligning towards that. As we, and I hate to say like, as our consumers get smarter, because I don't think that's actually what's happening, but I think as the expectations have changed for sellers and how they want to be engaged and how they want to interact in buying cycles, like understanding those needs and aligning with your sellers on those needs becomes such a crucial point, especially in the account planning process. And one of the things, Jake, that you touched on that I want to pivot back on is like you talked a lot about enterprise. Like is account planning only for enterprise type deals, or what are the right types of buying cycles that you should account plan for, or what are the ones you shouldn't?
I'll just jump in back there then. I think account planning is a non-negotiable if you're an enterprise. It's not like, is it appropriate or not? It's like, it's a non-negotiable. And I used to talk to a lot of my reps about this, especially when I was at Adobe, like, okay, there are sales reps and then there are professionals. Like, do you take your career path as something that you want to really become the best at? And is this something that you really want to hone your craft and become excellent at? And if that's the case and you want to be professional, this is a non-negotiable, right? So enterprise, let's put that aside for a second. Mid-market can be debated. It depends like in what part of mid-market are you selling to? How complex is your sales cycle? How complex is your product in and of itself? How many product offerings do you have? So I think account plans tend to, in my mind, match the level of complexity of your deal cycle and the complexity of your buyer as well. So I would say as you get down into the SMB, it becomes something that's not necessary, right? If you're selling transactional high velocity deals that are taking you anywhere from 3 to like 6 weeks, by the time you've actually mapped out your account and you've done with account planning, you should have closed the deal. So I would save your breath there and focus it more on perhaps like other parts of the deal cycle.
Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, my experience lines up almost exactly to what Jake had just mentioned. I think, having sold at an organization like Salesforce in the past, Jake brings up a really good point. If you have multiple products, right, where at Salesforce, there's 15 different sellers that all own a product that can work within the same account, regardless of what industry, what vertical, what segment of business that you're in, or which, how large your customers or how large the accounts are that you're selling into, there needs to be a level of transparency and collaboration between all of those sellers that own those different products to make sure that there is a unified vision, a unified point of view going into those deal cycles, right? And going into those conversations. So I think as Jake mentioned, the level of complexity, the number of folks that are involved, both internally on your own team, as well as the buying committee on the prospect side or the customer side, right? If there's a really large committee of folks that are going to be buying from you and engaging with stakeholders throughout your business, that's likely an opportunity to create a really unified and collaborative account plan to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
When you think about like an account plan itself, like how much of it would you say is strategic versus how much of it would you say is more like operational executionary?
Oh, that's such a good question.
I know I typed it so I didn't forget it because I wasn't.
It's
I was like, it's gonna go out of my head really fast.
I think it's a stellar question because there's parts of it that I'll just go ahead and say, like, I think it's an even 50-50 because I think you need to have a high level strategic plan, but you need to get very tactical into who owns what and who is doing what and when are things happening, and get very clear on the tactical pieces of it. So, for example, Ben, you mentioned like the overlap of like named account managers and then specialists on top of that. Like you could have multiple reps on a single account. There were times where at Adobe, I remember we were thinking like there were 13 different people who touched an account in the pre-sales motion. Insanity, like insanity. Talk about like customer acquisition cost, right? But like there needed to be a level of real tactical visibility in the plan. So I would say I think it's a pretty even 50-50 split.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that too, Jake. I think the operational piece is almost more of project management, right?
Yeah.
Who's gonna own what tasks? When are they getting completed by? Which primary contact at the prospect or customer account is going to be involved with that step, right? So just really laying out almost like a mutual action plan to a degree, both internally and even sometimes externally for the prospect to follow along with. But I think going back, Molly, to your question, how much of it should be revolved around strategy within the account? I think that other half is equally, if not maybe even more important. Again, aligning the entire team around having a compelling point of view. You can look at a lot of different resources to kind of formulate that point of view and collaborate on that with your team, whether it's what's going on with this prospect or account in the news, right? Are there any, did they just get funding? Have they just hired a bunch of reps? Did they just have a layoff, right? How should we think strategically about approaching this customer based on what's happening in their business, right? I think we've all probably looked at 10K reports. We've looked at investor reports, right? How can we pull out a few of these things that are happening within the business to create a compelling point of view around breaking in and actually having a relevant conversation with that account?
Molly, can I add one more thought there too?
Yeah, go for it.
Is like dawned on me when you were talking about this, Ben. One of the common mistakes, like the pitfalls that I see a lot of our clients run into when it comes to account planning as a conversation in the project around it is, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, don't make them over complex or too complex to the point where like you're starting to replicate your CRM though. It's not intended to become the source of like all record like your CRM. You've got a place for a lot of that information already. It can exist in Salesforce. It can exist in HubSpot. The idea is like, how do you bring this project together and how do you create visibility of all the moving pieces involved? So don't get overly complex in the way you build it out.
No, I think that's a great call out. One question that I have thinking about just account planning in general, right, is like, I know for enterprise, we've talked about like, yeah, everything should have a plan. Let's talk about like mid-market and SMB, right? Like, when do you decide what you account plan for versus what you don't? And like those expectations, right? Is it like everything that you're trying to prospect? Are you using different components of tiering? Is there a threshold of like at what point of engagement from a customer or like when they hit a certain point in the pipeline that you think about the plan? Or is it really, I've got this list of 100 accounts and I'm going to start planning on all of them? And this enterprise should probably be included on this. It's like, when do you start a plan for a prospective customer?
Ben, you have a thought there, or are you still cooking it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I think about this in two different ways, right? Inbound versus outbound, right? I'm probably going to have a list of, and again, this could work really regardless of segment. I mean, may work in SMB, but definitely your mid-market commercial up through enterprise. But the way that I like to think about this is I'm going to probably have a list of maybe my top 25, top 50 accounts for the year that I want to proactively outbound and reach out to and break into. Within that list of accounts, Molly, that's really where I'm going to be very strategic about putting together a plan myself, right? And being more proactive about getting something in place from an account plan perspective early on in the year. From an inbound perspective, let's say somebody raises their hand, they want to come in and have a conversation, right? I'm probably going to create a light account plan, if you will, and just try to get, a general sense as to what's going on within that business as they're coming in and asking to have a conversation with us. So that may look a little bit differently than my account plan for some of my more strategic targets, but I think there needs to be an element or a way to differentiate between how we treat folks that are maybe raising their hand and coming inbound and saying, hey, we want to talk to you, versus how do we treat those accounts that we do want to have a really strategic focus on from an outbound perspective. So I think the timing as to which or when you may create that plan can vary based on some of those factors in my experience.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I think there are different motions, right? And obviously, like, you're not aware of when these accounts are going to come inbound, and so you have to depict like when that is. You spoke a lot to the enterprise, like that's pretty straightforward. What I'll say, whether it's enterprise or mid-market, building on what Ben was talking about, if it's in your top tier accounts, so if you're segmenting your accounts based on who are your, every quarter, if you're a seller, you should be thinking about, okay, who are my non-negotiable must-win accounts this quarter? Who am I targeting? Tier those as your A tier accounts. Your B accounts may, be falling behind that. They clearly fit your ICP. They clearly like are high grade, and when you're in like maybe an account scoring model, but they're not the ones you're planning to attack necessarily. You're going to work with like maybe your SDR, your BDR team to go tackle those. And then you got your C tier accounts, right? So no question, you should be building those out with your A tier target accounts, so that you can also be putting a lot of the thought ahead of time as to like, okay, how am I going to work this account? How am I going to go after this account? And I would do that before the deal even engages. At the time that you say, okay, this is a focus for me this quarter, or this is a focus for me for this half of the year, build your plan out. Just like anything else you would do in your life, build your plan out of how you're going to go in that direction, so that you know how you're operating, right? Then I would say, like, on the lower segment of the business, if you're like lower mid-market SMB, I would say start differentiating like an account plan from a deal plan or like a deal room. And there's a lot of really cool tech out there right now that even have elements of account planning in them that can help manage the deal moving forward. And I would say that maybe be more reactionary with those accounts and leverage more of a deal plan element than more of an account plan element.
I think that's a great call out, right? So like, one thing that I think would be helpful to simplify for the audience, like, what's the difference between an account plan and a deal plan, right? Like, what's that like quick threshold of like, this is a deal plan versus this is an account plan?
Let me see if I can get this right. Super quick, right? Account plan, I think we've talked to that. Deal plan is actually an agreement that you come up with your customer. It's actually a plan that you and your customer work, or your buyer work on together of, here's our mutual action plan. Here's how we are going to work towards your end goal of implementation. And so the steps that are involved, your buying process that's involved, the different people, the stakeholders that need to be involved. And so you're actually gathering a lot of the information that you would research in an account plan in real time through discovery and conversation with your buyer. And then you are exposing that with them and collaborating with them. And sometimes you're even putting in account like project management. And like, I put a lot of Gantt charts in my deal plans with my clients. And so go check out some cool tools like Flola, for example, that just make that super, super easy for you.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to hit on, and I'm glad you brought it up, is like, how much of your account plan's internal versus external? So I think you kind of alluded to that, but like, obviously you're probably not taking your whole playbook and being like, hey, here, prospect, these are the things that we're going to do to get you to buy, right? But like, where are some of those pivotal points that you think about, like where you should have that mutual alignment and that consensus together in the planning process?
And I'm curious your thoughts, because like my answer is pretty straightforward. Like, account plan is always internal, and then the deal plan is also something I would build, but that's external facing. That's with my clients. So account plan is what we work on internally. Deal plan is what I'm working with together with my client.
Yeah, I would say that's how I've operated as well, in my experience. So account plan, something that the internal team is, collectively working on, not something that gets shared with the customer. But yeah, mutual action plan, mutual success plan, deal plan. They have a ton of different names. But I think the sooner that you can implement something like that, where you're mutually working with a prospect or customer on the exact steps that need to happen for them to eventually transact and close a deal, the earlier you can implement something like that, the earlier you can introduce that concept to them in a deal cycle. I've seen in countless roles in many different instances, the earlier you can implement a practice like that, the much faster deals tend to close. You're going to close them at a higher rate because, again, there is this mutual alignment. You are setting proper expectations with them. And we get an understanding as sellers what their buying process looks like. And you're really aligning to exactly what needs to happen on their side to, again, eventually get to that transaction.
No, and I think that that alignment is key, right? We talked about the expectations for, setting that alignment and how buyers want to buy, and those pieces I think is just so important to recognize. If we go, I'm going to take us a few steps back. When you think about the development of an account plan, who actually owns internally the strategy of what are your account plans? Which role in the business is sitting down and saying this is what we're going to capture in our account plans?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and take that initially, Molly. I think from a new business perspective, it's usually always an account executive or seller, right? They're typically the ones that are owning that process for any kind of prospect account or someone that's not yet a customer. Conversely, on the customer side, it's typically an account manager, customer success manager, somebody that has that existing relationship post-sale with a customer. They're going to understand where those areas are in the account for expansion, for cross-sell, for upsell, and maybe where there needs to be some additional help brought in from your side. So I think that's typically where I've seen a number of different roles be involved. But yeah, Jake, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, equally agree. I think the one thing so absolutely, in the end, to me, it's who's ultimately responsible for driving revenue forward in this account. So whether it's the AE or if it's the CSM or if it's the account manager, whoever ultimately is responsible for driving revenue in the account should take responsibility of that. Now, you can collaborate with I think a great use for some larger teams have inside sales reps or SDRs that are more junior roles that support a more senior AE. Right. So Ben, probably at your time at Salesforce, you had someone that could support you. And I think that's a great function for them to help build out, because it also gives them the experience and the exposure of how to build a proper account plan. So I would say you can leverage them too. But at the end of the day, if it's your quota, it's your responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you feel the CRO, the VP of sales, sales management, fit in with this planning process, right? So as a rep, are you sitting with your sales manager going through the plan? Where does leadership come in the planning process? That's probably a better way to set the question, as well as the expectations around account planning.
Well, I'll jump in there because I've played that role plenty of times, and I think it always starts with clearly articulating the expectation that it's being done. If you're not setting a clear expectation that this is what we do as a team and this is how we do it, then ultimately, if it's not getting done, it's on you, right? So take the ownership as a leader to say, team, this is how we operate, and this is the way we operate, and these are the tools we use to operate, and give your team the space to ask the questions of how and why, so that they can operate and execute it well as well. And then I would say there were multiple times early on in my career that I knew that I needed to be doing this, but I didn't have that kind of guidance or help. And so I built a lot of my own account plans. I built a lot of my own deal plans, and it took time until I figured out what worked well. And so I tell you as a leader, if you want your team doing this and you don't want them wasting time figuring out and what to do, go help them. Like standardize a format in which is best practice, and utilize that with your team. Don't like make them figure it out for themselves. Guide them in that process and provide them the resources to do it.
Yeah, I think more tactically from an individual contributor's perspective, a really good opportunity for you to sit down with your leadership and get their buy-in on some of the account plans that you've put together is bring them up in your one-on-one, right? You probably have a recurring one-on-one with your leader, your direct VP, every week, every other week, right? I think that's a really good part of that one-on-one motion to bring up, hey, here's a strategic account that I have and want to work for the next 3 months, the next 6 months. Let's review this together, and get their feedback, right? Get some buy-in, get some context, and get some additional input from your leader as you deliver that back to them and walk them through everything that you've put together. Obviously, we're not perfect as sellers. I'm sure that there are going to be some blind spots that they can call out in those account plans, and some areas of opportunity as well that we may not see initially. So I think it's a good time to bring those to leadership. But I think getting their eyes on it as soon as possible, and getting some input on really how to drive the deal and opportunity and conversation forward is super important.
Well, and one of the things that I like about it being, I'm going to say, more tops down than bottoms up, right, is like having some consistency and rigor around things. So, at the company I'm currently at today, we do account planning, right? We're a seasonal business, so it's starting every August. We're taking our partner model, right, and we're not doing traditional like account planning to consumer. We're working with our partners to plan how we're going to work together, which is still account planning, but understanding the organizations that we do a proper account plan with, that gets validated, gets reviewed, like is worked through with their sales manager and like coached through, sell at an 81% higher ACV than our partners that don't do account planning, right? So like those are, really, there's like this consistency and then this alignment and review that like actually I think not only builds accountability in your planning process, but also some of the measurability to like actually know that there's impact in it. And so that's one of the things that like, I think, I think about from an ops perspective a lot, is like, if I've got all my sellers doing their own thing, how do we scale this? Especially when we talk about like, how does marketing get involved with account planning, right? So like this consistency of like having something they can digest for retargeting or proper ABM types approaches too. Consistency becomes so key. And we did have a question in the chat that I want to get to, but Nina asked, for companies with more complex offerings, how have you seen good incentives to encourage collaboration without taking the onus off of the sales exec?
And I think I'm understanding the question, but is it collaboration amongst like the account team that would tackle that deal, or collaboration directly with the buyer? I guess I'm not quite sure the question. Maybe you could clarify.
I think you could take it both ways too, right? So maybe we start with like collaboration amongst, let's call it like the Adobe 19 or the Salesforce 19 people who are involved in a plan, and like building that type of incentive to collaborate. And then we'll take the second one for how do you get the actual consumer involved?
Well, I think from getting everyone involved, I think like that's, again, it goes back to the responsibility of a great AE won't have any hesitation to ask for help. Ben, I'm sure your biggest years where you crushed quota are probably the biggest years that you leaned on your peer support and you had no fear of asking for help, right? And so great enterprise account executives know how to align their internal resources to get the job done. And so a lot of it's just making sure you're communicating and setting expectations of how things are going to be done, asking for alignment. I think there also is, if you're going to the complexity level of like actually building an account plan, there's multiple people involved in that deal, then you're going to also be having regular conversations with those people involved internally on strategy and next steps. And so I'd be setting expectations of who's doing what and assigning tasks to people. So I don't know if it's like an incentive per se, but it's proper communication and clear expectation of who's doing what.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there needs to be a general consensus amongst the selling team, right? Or the other stakeholders that are going to be involved in creating the account plan that this needs to happen. It's for the good of us as a team internally. It's for the best. It's in the best interest of the prospect. It's in the best interest of the customer, that we're all on the same page and we're aligned on that. Yeah, I think that's my feedback there.
I see. And Nina added more context here about the team members who don't carry a bag. And one other thing I'll tell you, Nina, is like, look, we all wake up every single day, no matter what role you're in, whether you're an AE or an SDR or marketing or CS. Every single one of us wake up thinking like, I want to be the best at my job. Like everyone wants to succeed. And so what I will tell you is you will be most successful incentivizing or collaborating with your peers who don't carry bags if you understand what's in it for them and understand from their perspective, how are they incentivized and how do they look good in doing their role. And so if they somehow have involvement in your sales process to help collaborate with you to sell a deal, and they're going to be involved in a deal plan, I promise there's a part of their job that is tied to you being successful, but also them being successful in that endeavor. So figure out, a lot of conversations I had later stages, I was getting to know large like organizations and navigating or internally, is I would just ask them sometimes, like, how are you incentivized? And what are your KPIs tied to these projects? Once you know that, then you can help them in their role as well. So it's not just a take, it's a give and take.
Absolutely. It's I think a lot about days in marketing, right? It's like when you're all kind of working towards the same goal and understanding what people are driving towards, it definitely helps people have a little bit more empathy as well as know how to collaborate better. So that's a great takeaway. One question that I've thought about, and we touched on it a little bit, is like, where does technology come in with account planning? So I know we talked about, your account plan shouldn't take over your CRM and your, marketing automation and all of that, but like, should you be using a tool for account planning? Should you just be using a spreadsheet? What does like good, I guess, operationalizing, this account planning process through technology look like? And when do you know that you should do that? So you got a two-parter there.
Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, there's again, a few different lenses that you can look at this through in terms of trying to understand, going back to one of the initial questions, right? Like when or which accounts do I even create an account plan for, right? There's an element of prioritization within accounts, and how do we understand which accounts are even worth account planning for? We could go down that route, but I think in terms of, just generally, it doesn't need to be complex, right? I've had success using tools like Quip, Google Docs, a Word doc, right? It can be as simple as using something like that, or, something like a Prolific. I think that's a pretty elaborate account planning tool that's embedded within Salesforce as a different account planning solution. So I definitely think there needs to be some kind of element of technology involved to create this collaborative document. But again, I've seen a few different areas where that's certainly helpful. But Jake, I'd love to hear what that's maybe looked like in your experience at Adobe.
Yeah, I mean, in many places, I would say, okay, I am a big fan of like keeping things simple. So if it means starting in the spreadsheet, go for it. I've also come as like as an operator, come to learn to hate spreadsheets and like all the versioning that can happen because of it, and the confusion that can be created from it. So if your organization can afford a tool that can help with account planning, like I think it's worth an exploration. I think this is a worthy expense. But don't use that as not an excuse nor a crutch to not go out and build it. You can do this in a spreadsheet. You can do it in PowerPoint, for crying out loud, or in a Word doc, or on your piece of paper. So do it. On the flip side, like there are also technologies can inform you like when should you do this, right? So like Ben, I know you're not going to give a shameless plug, so maybe I'll set you up for one here, but I'm sure there are plenty of tools out there that you might be aware of that also can inform you on those, maybe those beat counts of when there's an engagement or when they're actually like in a buying behavior, and when you should probably go, utilize data as an insight, as a trigger event of, okay, this is an account probably I should start targeting and building an account plan for.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to prioritization, right? As sellers, we're always looking to understand, where can I make my time spent the most valuable? So that's ultimately, one of the biggest things that I try to focus on, obviously in my day-to-day, but 100%, that's an area that our technology at Affinity can certainly help with. I'm not gonna turn this into an Affinity commercial by any stretch.
I knew you wouldn't, but it's a great point to talk about right here.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there should be an element of understanding, when an account is in market, there's a bunch of different data points that we can look at, right? There's intent data, past opportunities, contacts that maybe we've met with in the past or that we have existing connections with. But there should absolutely be an element of being able to understand and uncover who might have an existing relationship within this account internally at my company that I can leverage, right? And how can I break down that barrier of doing a bunch of cold outbound and maybe get a warm introduction into this account, right? That's certainly a big piece of how I try to run my book of business on a quarter over quarter basis. But again, that in addition to a lot of those other data points and triggers that you can look to, whether it's data around TAM, ICP, again, intent data, are these accounts actively researching solutions like ours or companies like ours that can help with problems that they might be having? You kind of stack all of those data points on top of each other. And ultimately, once you get that account list narrowed down to a point where you feel pretty good about it, taking that next step of being able to say, which one of these contacts within these accounts do we maybe have a relationship with already that I can potentially leverage for an introduction? That's a huge time saver, and typically not a level of insight that many people have today.
No, I think those are great call outs, and like just continuing to talk through just what data exists to go into the plan, even on top of like the relational aspect of it. In your experience, and you guys both have plenty of experience with account planning, like what have you seen go wrong, right? Like where has maybe just a component of a plan like not been valuable that maybe was harped on, or just like a big miss in the planning process?
I might need to think about this for a second. Ben, do you have any thoughts?
I think generally where I've seen account plans go bad or maybe miss the mark in terms of completing an objective or getting a deal done or expanding within a customer account, it typically just stems from a lack of communication, right? And a lack of alignment among the broader team around that specific goal or plan, right? These plans should be outlining some kind of ultimate outcome. Here's what we want to make sure happens within this account this year or within the next 6 months. Typically, when those plans don't work or they go bad, there seems to be a lack of alignment around that goal or a lack of collaboration around that goal amongst the team. So I feel like it's more of an internal breakdown amongst the team that's supposed to be enacting or actioning that plan.
Yeah, that's where exactly what my head went to immediately was lack of ownership, and that part of that is communication. But we talked about earlier is that whoever owns the quota owns the account plan. If you are half-assing, then everyone else that's involved in that project with you is going to half-ass it too. Right? They're gonna meet you at the level of which you're operating. And if you're demonstrating to them it doesn't matter to you, then they're not going to waste their time either. Right?
Then why should it matter to them, right?
Right. No one's going to carry you. Like we all did that in our college like projects. So we're not going to do it for you in the work environment, right? And so like the idea here is you've got to set the bar of like what level of I guess accountability you're going to take, and what level of importance is this to you in the way you operate. And then I think you set that pace, and then the way you communicate to it as well. And that always like over and over, I would say, unfortunately, like that's probably the majority of account plans that I have seen in my time with coaching reps and managing reps. Is I would say great reps, probably 30 to 40% of the time are the ones really doing it right, and majority of reps, 56% of the time, like kind of more half-assing it, and that's where I see it falling apart. Is like it's not just a task, it's not just another thing you're supposed to do. This is a way for you to separate yourself from the reps and the professionals, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, to chime in on like the half-assing, right? It's like some of that comes back with like the accountability and like the expectation setting also from leadership, right? And so in the times where you're going to have, a highly motivated AE who understands like this is my means to my end, and like if I don't do a good account plan, like I'm not setting myself up for success to be able to, I'm going to say feed my family. We're getting really emotional here. But on the flip side of that is like, if the expectation of the sales leadership and the team, like, because they know account planning yields higher results, like aren't holding their team accountable for it too, that's where I think things start to crumble, right? And that's where, like, from my experience, like AEs are like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm not going to put the time, energy, and effort into it. And like the manager's like, yeah, that's fine. So I think like, you've really got to have that like understanding of where this fits in your sales process. And it's like, it's the non-negotiable.
Yeah. It bums me out. Like I get it when you like say, like the rep, but when you like said the manager's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it kills me. Like if you're that manager and you're out there and you like you're passive about it, you're just setting up that like level of ownership with your team. You're teaching them to have that level of ownership as well. And that's just a pity.
Right. And that's, I think, where things like start to crumble. And like, and you look at the downstream impact of like not having a good account plan, not only the impact, you still might close the deal and not have a good account plan, right? Like, I think we can all align, like that can happen. Right. But I think when you look at, some of the quantifiable things that come out of solid account planning, right? Your velocity, your ACV, some of those key metrics, how, and how does that get impacted, right? You've got now alignment with your stakeholder just between the AE and the buyer, but like also have marketing support. You're able to better multi-thread. You're able to retarget. You're able to get, offline messaging and online messaging in place. But then, and the piece that we really haven't talked about and aren't going to cover probably in the next 15 minutes is the post-sale. And that to me is like that handoff becomes so critical from the account plan and like sets that direction of success for retention and for growth within the business. So I'd love to talk to you guys about your experience of like what the handoff process of the account plan looks like.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, and let's make time for it if we can, like, because I think it goes beyond just the account plan. I have built in a process that I not only started implementing towards the end of my leadership career, and that I brought into my consulting career. Is it goes beyond just the account plan, but I actually build it into the CRM motion as well. And so like there are certain fields as part of like closing out the deal that we need to fill out in order to be able to do a proper handoff for our partners in customer success or client success or account management, whatever you want to call it. And as part of that exercise, what you need to do is spend time with your peers in those organizations and ask them, okay, what information do we continue to fail on delivering to you that you need that will help you prevent from having to do the same discovery conversation that we've already done 20 times prior to handing this off? The whole goal for you should be like, how do we not create a miserable buying experience for our buyers through making them go through this whole rigmarole all over again after we hand them off to the customer success side. So not only, think about that as part of your account plan, but think about including that also in your process in CRM so that there's lossless learning that's occurring in that handoff.
Yeah, I love that you call out operationalizing this in whatever CRM you're using, Jake. I think that's such a great call out. But that's a super valid point too, is really finding some time to sit down with those folks in the post-sales organization and just understand like where are the breakdowns today, right? I won't repeat exactly what you said, Jake, but I think that that's such an important piece of this. But 100%, there needs to be again, going back to the word transparency, there needs to be that level of collaboration and transparency as a deal, a new customer comes on board. We, or me in my experience, we typically would always set aside 30 minutes, an hour to review the account plan to make sure that everybody that's going to be involved in implementation, customer success, onboarding is up to speed. They know what challenges that prospect or customer is having. They know what to expect from a technical perspective as they're starting to onboard and get their hands in, the actual technology. So again, I think making sure that there is a standardized process of that handoff and the internal communication that needs to happen to make sure that those teams are set up for success and the customer is set up for success is extremely important.
I'm gonna say, and the customer knows what success actually is, right?
Yes.
And I think like we throw that word around a lot, right? And like we're like, set somebody up for success, but I don't know that we always define what success means. We internally might define what success means, but probably more important is like we understand what that means for our customers. And I love hearing this as somebody who worked in professional services at Marketo. It's like that handoff is so key to be able to deliver on what, no offense to my fellow salespeople on the call, but was promised during the sales cycle and the expectations that were set. And more often than not, it was just getting thrown over. And, no one wants to repeat themselves, especially if you go through, a 6+ month sales cycle. You want to be able to come in and hit the ground running. I know we've got a little bit more time left. Audience, feel free to keep shooting questions. And Ben, Jake, is there anything we didn't cover that you guys are like, I'm going to be really upset if we don't talk about this when it comes to account planning?
You said something earlier that made me start thinking about like we haven't talked much about marketing's role in all this. And I actually think there's some things you can do to help set them up for success in this, on whether it's the targeting side on the top of the funnel or the customer marketing side on the back end of this. But so a couple things. One, on what we were just talking about, one critical, here's a tactical piece of something you can do right away as part of your account planning, and then it bleeds into your deal plan and then bleeds into your CRM handoff. But make sure it's part of your process as your discovery process as the AE, that you're clearly defining what the customer is going to define success as, right? So Molly touched on this, but clearly define that, right? Not just understanding their current state and their problem, their pain, their future state, and what they want to achieve. No, how are we defining the first year of success together, right? And documenting that. And you have that conversation with CS, and you hand that information off so that they don't have to ask that question, that they can continue to build off that, and they can create some really clear metrics around that. The reason why this is so critical is it begins to also set up like your marketing organization as a jumping off point of where they can actually work with this client, of knowing, hey, this is exactly where this client said they were at the time they worked with us, and where they wanted to be at the end of a year of working with us, or 6 months of working with us. And as customer marketing can go in and say, this account is primed for a case study. Let's go work with this account to actually collect information so that we can build a case study together, versus like, how many times have you had the conversation of like, well, who's good for a case study and what do they want to get out of it? No, you've already collected all the information. The case study's done. Just go collect the information. So that's one thing. And then going back to earlier in the conversation, you said something about marketing, and it made me, oh, Ben, you said this. And it's like, I hope you all understand, you caught this, is like, if you involve marketing, and Molly, you talked about this early on in the process, so that there's trigger events when you account plan saying, okay, I'm going to go target these accounts this month or this quarter. And you've operationalized a process in your CRM that you can trigger that. Then marketing can then say, okay, perfect. These are the accounts that Ben is targeting right now. So we're going to stop including them in certain drips, but we're going to also retarget them, and we're going to start inviting them to certain events. And so it allows for what's truly called orchestration or account-based marketing to take effect. So you can't just think about this as like, how can the seller close the deal, but how can we orchestrate a beautiful sales experience and surround this buyer with information to like facilitate this whole journey?
Yeah, I think from a pre-sales perspective, it's such a good point of view to share. Again, account planning is important for sellers. I think we've established that. But again, the value that document or that process can bring to other departments, such as marketing, to be able to, again, prioritize where marketing spends their time, where they help you as a seller, as a sales team, warm accounts up, right? Get accounts into the funnel for you to then work. If you can go to them proactively as a seller and say, here are the 50 accounts that I want to make sure that we target within the next 3 months, within the next 6 months, that's helping them do their job, right? That's being a good business partner as a seller. So I think those are, again, a few other tidbits to keep in mind. And at the end of the day, marketing's there to help sales, and it should be a pretty symbiotic relationship. So, being able to proactively, take information to them to help them do their job to ultimately close business, that's a win-win at the end of the day.
And ultimately, thinking selfishly from like the marketer's perspective, like just your customer acquisition cost and like your LTV and your core metrics that you really care about should hopefully see a little bit more positive results on them if you're working the same angles. What else didn't we talk about? Again, audience, shoot questions in. You've got Ben and Jake, some free time with them.
Yeah, I want to see any last minute zingers from the audience, right? Like throw a hard one out there. See if you can stump us. But I think, I mean, like, to sum up some of the thinking as maybe people are thinking about questions, is like, I hope people take away from this is that even though you might be in a position where, you're captaining this effort, or you're like leading this effort, that it's a group effort, and it's a team effort, and it's a collaboration, it's an orchestration, that if you're going at it alone, and if your takeaway from this is like, I need to go build account plans, and you're going to go at it alone, that's a miss, right? The idea here is like, go at this as a team, because failing as a team is something we can all learn from together, but failing as alone can often be a fireable offense. So figure out ways to win and fail together.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes of all time is, "It's okay to lose. It's not okay to lose alone." Right.
Totally.
So, and I think you bring up such a good point, Jake. Like, regardless of whether, folks listening, whether they're doing account plans today or not, or, looking at ways to prioritize accounts or not, proactively do something like this. Take it to your leader if it's not something that's mandated or being communicated as necessary within your organization today. Take it to your leader, right? Jake, I'm sure that you can attest, when reps would bring something like that to you, an account plan, a unique point of view on an account, and ask for feedback, that goes a really long way to show that you're doing your job and that you care about, taking hold of your career, your success. So
are you kidding, man? That's like my work love language right there. Like, heck yeah. Do that.
No, and I think like just that's things that popped out there, right? Is like, yeah, anyone who's sitting in the audience who's like, man, we really should be doing account planning at our company. Like, that's going to be a boulder rolling up a hill that like you're going to want some teamwork behind to really do well.
Yeah. Yeah. Get me on the phone with your boss. I'll help you. Because like, if I would love to have a conversation with someone who tries to convince me that they shouldn't be doing it, or their team shouldn't be doing it. Like, unless they're an SMB, put me on the phone with them, and then I'll record it for you so you can be a fly on the wall and just enjoy it.
And I think we've talked through that, like, this doesn't have to be this thing, like I'm like this thing, right? And I use this thing and my hands are like this, right? Like, your account plan doesn't mean that you and 12 people need to sit in a room for 7 hours and like put sticky notes on a wall. And all I think about is the yarn going around everywhere of like how you're going to do this, right? It doesn't have to be like that. Like, you can make incremental, V1 type plans that like it still facilitate alignment and direction and like goals, right? I think goals and expectations are probably such a critical piece to the plan, but just getting in the motion and getting in the habit and like the memory, not the memory, but like the muscle memory around putting that into your process, like guarantee will provide outcomes.
Ben,
all right, audience, you guys are being quiet.
I know. I was thinking, Ben, should we rapid fire and just tell them a couple fields that they should consider in building into their account plans?
Yeah. What should you capture in an account plan? I think that's a great idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, just offhand, and just riff with me here, Jake. I think
Yep. Yep.
looking at things like, Google News, triggers around what's going on within the company. Are they being mentioned in the news? That's one thing. Key executives within the account, key job changes in the account. Have any executives changed jobs recently or gotten a promotion? Trying to think of some other ones. Feel free to jump in, Jake.
Yeah, I would call out key initiatives and any dates that are associated with those that you become aware of, so you can be thinking around those, especially on the customer success side of the account plan. That's a key one. I think also just capturing some basics around the accounts, like just so everyone has an idea of like the size of this account, and also even so like revenue is not, it's not a bad thing to just capture just some of the firmographics and demographics of the account in the account plan. I'd also would call out even like if this is, what tier level is this for you, right? Is this a current target for you or not? I see some questions coming in now. Should we jump on those?
Yeah, I was gonna let you guys finish that thought. So question out here: in my org, we're exploring various data points to classify account health, helping prioritize multi-year renewals when health score is positive and mitigate churn otherwise. How do you measure the impact your customers are getting from your service?
Ooh, this is a whole different webinar. That's a good question.
We could do a full hour on that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Molly, this is your world. Like, why don't you fill it in?
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of organizations, right, you've got what is a health score, right? And I think a health score is an aggregation of a variety of probably usage and sentiment based interactions that a consumer is having with your product or service or organization, pending what you sell, that you're using to effectively grade how healthy they are. I think part of a health score, right, and like that measuring the impact your customers are getting in your service, there's like, again, there's the usage components, like are they using it the right way? But then there's also more of like the NPS components of like the perception of the value that they're getting. I could be going into your tool and using it every day for 2 hours a day, but I might not be getting actual value from that, or I might not be getting perceived value from it because I'm not using it correctly or not using it for my right use cases and I don't understand it. So I think there's kind of that balance of like what you're seeing happening versus what you're hearing happening, and making sure you're accounting for both of those in overall health. One thing that I see companies screw up all the time when it comes to NPS is that when they're actually asking for that feedback. Like, oh yeah, you just signed up and you logged in. How happy are you? Well, I hope you're pretty happy because you just got through this, or you just finished, a service interaction that was really frustrating. Like, so you've got to look at like how and when you're asking for some of that feedback as kind of important to make sure you're not skewing your results too. And if you're only asking for NPS once a year, like that's also an issue. Any other thoughts on health scoring?
So there's like a whole debate. That's such a good call out, that don't even mix up CSAT and NPS scoring here too, because they're different elements. And so make sure that you understand that. What I'll add to that is like, I'll be forever grateful to one of my mentors, Mark Roberge, who invested in a startup that I was in, and then personally like helped me think through a lot of the things that like today I carry with me in the conversations with a lot of my clients. But one of the key things there was really pushed me hard to understand what were the leading indicators of success for my clients. So aside from NPS and aside from CSAT was what, and this might take a sophisticated team like data scientists and analysts to work out, but figure out what are the key data points, whether it's in your service, your product, your tool, that identify that this client is either one, has a high propensity to renew, or two, has a high propensity to upsell. And that typically is tied to certain behaviors that occur typically within the first 6 months, or even the first 3 months, or even the first 60 days of them purchasing and implementing. I promise you that there are behaviors that your buyers will have inside of your product that will indicate propensity to renew or expand. Figure those out and you will be forever grateful.
Absolutely. We've got one more question in here, so I'm cutting you off, Ben. I know you've got thoughts, but we can do this one on the next one. But this one can come to you because I think you're equipped to handle this. Can you speak to the difference of ideal customer profile tiering and priority tiering? We can't go after every ideal customer at once. Not all customers are created equal, and not all can be the same priority. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think looking at ICP or ideal customer profile, you're incorporating things like industry, right? Are we successful at selling to folks within a certain industry, within a certain company size or segment? Could be regional, if you want to even get that granular. I think as you start to define what your ICP looks like, then you get into the exercise of prioritizing those accounts. So once you have your ICP set, you're able to understand, we want to target this industry, this vertical of companies this size that maybe are also using this technology, that have, a few other characteristics, right? There's numerous things that you can plug in there. But once we have that ICP defined, how do we start to prioritize those accounts? And again, one of the biggest things that we look at here at Affinity are existing relationships. So who has an existing relationship within my company with key contacts or key stakeholders in some of those ICP accounts? Those are absolutely accounts that I want to prioritize and go after first as a seller. So being able to understand where can I find a warm introduction and break into that account the fastest. Other things to look at from a prioritization standpoint, again, we mentioned this before, things like intent data, other technographic information. There's, again, countless other things that you can look into. But Jake, I don't know. I know we're a couple minutes over our time, but Jake, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that.
All I'll say is, I just put in the chat, GTM Partners, a good partner of ours, has a ton of really stellar content around this very topic, around ICP, and then total like who should you be targeting in this moment, and some of the demographic concepts or behavioral traits of that. So go research that, and it'll be insightful, because that's a stellar question, and you can't boil the ocean.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ben, Jake, everyone who joined today. I always love these conversations. I always take things out of them. Reminder, have a plan, work your plan. Best of luck to everyone. I know everyone on the panel is super active on LinkedIn. Connect with us. Would love to continue to have conversations and answer any questions that we can. Thank you to Rev Genius for continuing to build the community around this. I'm just so excited about the knowledge that we're sharing, and these events are awesome. So thanks everyone, and have a great, I about said happy Friday. It's not Friday, but at least it's not Monday. So we're almost there, guys.
It could be. See ya.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.